Thank you, Jeff. And at this point, I'd like to invite our morning speakers up to the podium, and we're going to have our panel discussion and open mic session. So I'm going to take the mic. This is the mic that's going to be open. And I'm going to stand up here and invite you guys to come and ask questions of our distinguished panel. And we have a number of virtual attendees, and we're going to try to get their questions in through the system. Tim will be collecting those and getting those to me, and I'll repeat those. It's been said that an army runs on its stomach, and so does a good conference. So we're going to have an excellent lunch for you prepared by the catering department here at the Hershey Country Club. And I've had a few meals here, and I can tell you it's really outstanding, and you're in for a treat. But before we get to lunch, we're going to have our small group meet and greet session. Again, your small group is on your badge. Group 1 is going to meet in the traditions room and will be focused on AI and human symbiosis from a human factors perspective. Group 2 is going to be human factors approaches to quality, safety, and value, and that's going to be in the Jay Wetzel room, and then creating a human factors center of excellence in the Fazio room. And that will be after this, after the break. So we're going to have our panel discussion, then a break, then the small group initiation session, and then lunch. So, so I'd like to now thank our panelists and invite your questions. Dr. Graper.
Thank you, Mike. And I'd like to thank all the speakers. It makes my day as somebody who's been working on patient safety for a long time to see so much interest from the human factors and systems engineering community, because we need all the help we can get. There's a tremendous amount of harm in patient care still today. I'd like to get you to think a little bit more about the third question that Sarah asked, and that is, how do we better prepare the professionals going into healthcare to be accepting and to work successfully with AI? Because in my experience, medical school and also nursing school are nowhere close to doing that. It's still a matter of training the individual to learn a bunch of knowledge and to be practicing on their own. There's no training on working as part of a team, working with a patient, working with AI. So how do we make progress there, and are there any models out there that maybe we could learn from?
So, okay. So I can speak I can speak a little bit to what I know about what we have done at the Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine. One of the things I was so happy to see in Dr. Brady's presentation was the integration of health system science. And the reason why is I do feel like that is a space for us to, from a medical education standpoint, begin to be very deliberately pulling in human-centered design, some of these, teaming is part of the health system science wheel. Systems thinking is part of the wheel, leadership is part of the wheel, informatics is all, and I'm saying the wheel because if you Google health system science and click images, there's a thing that comes up that looks like a wagon wheel. So all of those different pieces and aspects, I think, are some of the things that we've talked about here today. And in terms of interacting with the patient, obviously there's tremendous space and engagement from the simulation community, whether that's through standardized patients or through interacting with mannequins. And I do think we're getting more and more sophisticated from the simulation world in integrating in situ sim and things like that, using sim for ops, not just for education, which I think is a wonderful crossover episode that we should do a lot more of. In terms of working with AI, to me, that's a tremendous space because we have a lot of our clinicians, our mentors and teachers who are sometimes extremely facile with that and sometimes not. And so the students may be teaching how to utilize AI. However, they don't have the expertise to engage in that curator behavior yet. And so I think it's a really interesting and tricky balance. In terms of working with AI as a member of the team, that to me is a really interesting prospect. We're starting to do some little baby versions of that in our simulation center, where we're integrating, an AI part of the work, but it's not particularly sophisticated yet. I don't know very much about nursing education, so I would love to learn from someone else.
So you asked two questions, and they're somewhat separate. Let me begin with the first question, which is about medical education. I think the last thing we should do is teach people about generative AI. I think the thing we should teach them about are all the things that need to be solved using generative AI. And those are completely different approaches. I'm going to give you one statistic that I hope everyone leaves the conference remembering, and I think every medical student should know. According to the CDC, if we could effectively manage chronic disease, and they don't mean perfectly, they just mean as good as the best places today, we'd reduce heart attacks, strokes, cancers, and kidney failure by 30 to 50%. Now, I want you to imagine American healthcare with 30 to 50% fewer heart attacks, strokes, cancers, and kidney failures. That's $1.5 trillion saved, and that's somewhere around 400,000 to 500,000 lives or deaths prevented. Lives saved, deaths prevented. That is where I think we need to begin medical education, not with all the details about chronic disease and the various enzymes and hormones and other things that all relate to it, but very specifically. And by the way, I'm not even talking yet about prevention. I'm not talking about lifestyle medicine. I'm not even talking about food and processed foods and high caloric foods. I'm talking simply what the clinician does, effectively managing blood pressure, managing blood glucose, managing heart failure, managing the types of things that are under the control of clinicians. 30 to 50% fewer heart attacks, strokes, kidney failures, and cancers. In terms of the model, I'm not going to give you an educational model for doctors, but for patients. And that's the Khan Academy, which is in Northern California. And for those of you not aware of it, it's tipping education on its head. Today in school, you go there, you hear a lecture, you go home and you do homework, and then you get a test on it. The Khan Academy flips it around. Before you go to class, you study the problem using virtual tools. Then when you go there, you don't have to hear the lecture on how to do the mathematical problem. You can start to interact. You can start to evolve. You can start to advance around it. And the conversations become much better and deeper. That's the model for the doctor-patient interaction. The patient doesn't go to the clinician with simply, I have a symptom, take care of it, doctor. They go there like that patient I told you about, knowing what they had. So when they hear that's most likely a rotator cuff tear, they don't have to ask what's a rotator cuff tear. They already know. When they hear that they need an MRI, they don't have to say, why are you ordering an MRI? They know exactly why. And now they can ask the questions they really should be asking, which is going to be post-operatively, what do I need to do? How do I prepare myself for surgery? How do I minimize infection? Those are the questions that doctors never have time to address. And they hand a 12-page handout to the patient who goes home and never reads it. The opportunities are massive, as both the other panelists have talked about, to change what we do by changing the systems, by making doing the right thing the easy thing to accomplish, by being sure that you've done everything to maximize the likelihood of success. And if we start applying that thinking and methodology to empowering patients, to giving them the monitors and the tools to be able to better manage and control chronic disease, to be able to trust the technology and the patient, to be able to figure out when they don't need care, but also when they do need care, and provide that now with a different model than the office visit using telemedicine at that moment, we will be able, hopefully, to prevent 30 to 50% heart attacks, strokes, kidney failures, and cancers. And that's my hope for American medicine.
Well, that's That's terrific. So a couple, I mean, I think a lot of the answer to your question is in the question, Mark, as far as, what we need to do. And I think exposure to a lot of those principles is the answer, like I mentioned in health system science. I think there's a way of thinking too about knowledge and education and experience and training. Sarah mentioned it, I think, in other contexts, but we need to have a little bit more flexible thinking. We often fall into a situation and say there's a quality or safety problem, there's a meeting to discuss it, and then options come up. And it's an either or, scenario, right? Same way for healthcare. We're either going to treat you this way or that way. And that is often, I think, the question that needs to be asked. But, being more open to both and I don't mean indefinitely that we're going to do everything for everything. That's not realistic either. But one of the things that I'm hopeful about AI is that it's actually going to be checking us, right? It's going to be, and by checking us, I don't mean necessarily, well, there will be some oversight with, cameras in the room, and that's going to be okay. It's going to be needed, especially if you ask the patient. We're all patients, whether we're clinicians or not. But by both and, I mean, we'll be able to try things, and we won't have the measurement burden that exists now to be able to actually understand what worked best. Worked best for the unit, for the whole system, for the individual patient, whatever the context and the question is. If AI can take off some of the measurement burden, that will be huge. That will be immense, because that's one of the main barriers to improving right now is just, the ability to get useful, reliable, valid information on which to base decisions. So that's one, sort of embracing, the both and approach. And then with respect to training specifically, I think we need to be a bit more agile about, curricula and I don't work in a medical school. I've interacted with lots of folks who do, so I know that experience, through their experience. But we probably need to get away from the fact that, real estate on the curriculum and exposure to students, that needs to be driven, by an evidence base as well. So what is the just enough information that a practicing physician needs to do when they get their degree? Do they, and by the way, continuous learning is absolutely going to be a part of the mix too. I mean, that's always been, I think, a part of healthcare. It's just become increasingly important. But we really need to make some hard decisions about the time spent in a degree, and, is another course in pathology the right thing, or is it actually, a course not necessarily just in AI, but in health information technology generally, tailored to a user and a clinician so that they know enough. They know what they need to trust. They know what to look out for. They basically know the risks and hazards as well as the benefits of being a user of that tool, right? Just like any other professional, technician or otherwise, gets checked out on a piece of equipment before they're actually, allowed to use it. So I think that's another point. And then the final point I would just wrap up on is to say, consistent with this just enough approach and agile systems of training and education, thinking about a basic level of knowledge for all different levels of practice and understanding. There's an electrophysiology analogy that's in my mind, so humor me with this one, but whether you go to the person in healthcare who knows the most about electrophysiology, an electrophysiologist, right? They've got an exquisite amount of training. They know everything about, the electrical activity of the heart. Or you go down to the sort of bottom end of the spectrum in terms of knowledge on this topic, a technician who's the one that, puts the EKG, monitor on, and all the places in between, all the points in between, an RN, a primary care physician, a general cardiologist, again, all the way up to electrophysiologist. They all have a basic understanding of cardiac physiology, and it's a common understanding that you know, they all know the basics. And so I think we need to take another look in the technology-rich world that we're living in, and it's only going to get more. You know, what is that common level of knowledge, not only for technology, but for systems and for other things? Basically, these topics, we know from evidence that they're influencing the quality of care that's delivered. We need to take a closer look at how much knowledge each individual needs to have about them. And I'm not saying replace anything, again, both and, but I think it's really a fundamental question. So thanks for the question, Mark.
Can I just pitch for the not medical student professors and folks in the room and the clinicians? The more we can get our students, like the more I can get my students into the clinical setting, the better solutions they're going to come up with. And opening those doors is incredibly difficult if you are not part of the healthcare system. So, you know, if you have opportunities to bring students in or to partner with folks at your universities, that is differentiating. And the same for folks who are trying to develop technologies to solve problems.
Yeah, hi, Elizabeth Krupinski from Emory University. Thanks for the great talks and discussion. This is more by way of kind of comment and it also addressing the former question. I'm going to put on a totally different hat than most people know me for, which is my telemedicine hat. And I'm a former president of the American Telemedicine Association, current president of the Society for the Education of Research in Connected Health. And guaranteed, I agree 100%, it's telemedicine and it's AI that is going to be the future of healthcare. And I can guarantee you everybody in the telemedicine community is 100,000% working on the synergy between the two and integrating AI and various tools into telehealth. Because and remote patient monitoring. I mean, it's just the way it's going to go. So in answer to the other question, in the context of telemedicine, I also work with the AAMC. They have a set of telehealth competencies that was developed about 5 years ago. We are currently in the revision phase and guaranteed competency in AI. And again, not figuring out, you know, they don't got to be computer scientists. They got to know how to use it, what are the failure points, et cetera. So guaranteed, we have a voice, me, on the AAMC committee that's looking at those guidelines. They also are creating a separate guidelines for just regular competencies in AI, whatever you want to call it. Nursing also has a telehealth competency that I believe they're in the process of revising and incorporating telehealth. Telepsychiatry/psychology also developed. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people that develop telehealth competencies. Right now, they are all going back and revising and incorporating very much from this human factors perspective. They don't realize it, but they're talking about how do we, you know, incorporate AI into all these competencies without saying you got to be a computer scientist to continue to be a physician. So it is, you know, happening in the field, and it's great to see that it is getting into our education in a way that I think is amenable to what we're talking about here.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you're there. Great. I'm going to work my way over. We have a number of... I'm going to hand the microphone first to Dr. Catchpole.
Thank you. If you know anything about me, you'll know exactly what the question I'm going to ask is, and it's the reflection of the last question, is how do we get more human factors people into working in AI, also in healthcare in general, but in specifically with AI, because I think if we, and we're all here to, anyway, that's the question. It's a simple question. How do we do that?
Funding. What? Who said that?
Uncharacteristic for me, I've got a short answer. I think when AI fails, when AI examples fail, I don't mean broadly, and it's because of human factors, you know, because we know it's going to be, right? In many cases, not always, but in many cases, we point that out and recognize it. And I think essentially what I'm talking about is creating a market for the knowledge that your field has. That essentially is one part of the answer in my view. How exactly to do that, I don't know, but essentially that's the truth. That's what's happening, you know. And I'm curious, like the last question about, or last comment about telehealth, my guess is as telehealth has gotten better, those competencies have changed, and they've become less about telehealth actually, because, you know, early competencies in telehealth were probably just how to turn it on and get connected and make it work. They really weren't as much, they were more about IT than they were about health. And so, you know, and again, that's the point I think for agile systems, because, you know, competencies will be very dynamic. Some will be, you know, some of the foundational stuff. But I think back to your question, you know, creating a market that is clear and sort of pointing out, you know, we need to solve these problems, and if we don't, we're going to have another set of waste, which is waste on actually probably a good product, a true innovation in AI, but a perceived failure because of human factors.
It's a little dizzying when you go between the medical school and the business school. Because all the medical school wants to know is how do we do the right thing, and all the business school wants to know is how do we make more money. And my observation is that the right thing doesn't happen until you create an economic context around it. I'm sorry about that. It's only been, 20 years since To Err Is Human, maybe a little bit longer. I think it was 1998 or something, 25 years. It's not that we don't know what to do. We just don't have the systems to do it. When I wrote my first 2 books, I kept writing about what we must do, what we should do, what we need to do, all those words. And my observation was that nothing changes. So I think we need to create, there are only 2 ways it happens. It happens through legislation, it happens through economic models. Someone is going to have to say this is important besides the people in the room. We need to educate them. I think there were a few elected people in the room. They're the ones who can help do it. Legislation can be passed to create the necessity to accomplish it. And when you do that, then you immediately bring the right people into the room. When you do that, you immediately start using generative AI. When you create the right context, the right things happen. And that's also why I think capitation. You know, I led a capitated group. Patient safety was very high. We dropped the number of errors down by 75%. Why was that? It was the right thing to do, but it's the right thing to do everywhere. Economically, that's how we did best. We made the most money when patients stayed healthy. We made the most money when medical errors were reduced. We made the most money when chronic disease was controlled. I'm sorry. That is just the way, the reality, at least maybe the business school teaches. And I teach in the business school with the strategy that sits in place. I think it's just an example of the human nature. And Sarah made a great point. You know, the brilliance of humans, but also the fallibility. That is what, if you don't change the incentives, you're not going to get the answer. As soon as you do, I think it's going to occur. So that's the opportunity. And in the interim, I think leaders like you are going to bring in people because you're motivated, you have all the right ways to do it. But if we try and change it nationally, at the level of 350 million people, if we can try to change it in a way to save hundreds of thousands of lives, not just 1 or 2 lives at a time, it's going to require a complete system shift. And to do that, as I say, I think it's going to happen legislatively, or it can happen by the purchasers. Why would an employer not want to keep people healthier? Why would an insurer not want to keep people healthier? So those are the opportunities. The elected officials, I apologize, you have some mixed messages. You have people who are funding things in order to be able to maintain their own individual profitability, and you also have constituencies wanting to vote. And hopefully you'll listen more to the constituents than to the economic forces around you.
One of the things that occurs to me, I think this is, it may be related, I haven't matured this thought yet, but is we value human-centered design in so many other parts of our lives. Like if our phones were as annoying to use as like 80% of healthcare technology, they would never survive. And so, and we certainly wouldn't be addicted to them. And, oh boy, here we go. Technology designers, and I would argue human-centered designers, have figured out how your attention works, and they're deploying it purposefully. And I think we have significant opportunity. That's kind of what I was trying to say, is we have opportunities to more deeply understand how humans work, to use it to be able to really integrate some of these things into into the design of technology. I don't think healthcare always thinks of itself in this particular way. It feels weird to think about capturing attention in a different way. But that's really what you're trying to do for a nurse who has, who's on an 8-to-1 ratio or a 2-to-1 in an ICU. And I do think you're exactly right. The economic side of this is really, really critical. And I jokingly said funding, but I'm not kidding. The way that you get the next generation, just to link it back, is through is through funding those spaces for students and providing that kind of access. Obviously, again, I'm biased because this is my lifeblood, but it is so essential for research to be able to occur and to build up those next people to go out and do greater, better things than we could ever dream.
Thank you. I love how it took like 2 questions before we start talking about money.
Sorry.
No. Now that the Band-Aid's been ripped, we can talk about real stuff because it's not going to happen otherwise, right? And my intention was to poke that bear. Short of replacing our system with a new one, which sounds like a great idea, I'm wondering if the panel could respond with perhaps a little bit more practical strategy. Like we had the equation on the screen here about value, quality over cost, and that sounds great. It sounds a lot like maybe a little bit better way to define return on investment, which I don't know if any of you have tried to get an AI project approved. It's a requirement. They won't move at all without that. I'm wondering if you could give us more practical advice or guidance on how does one get funding? How does one get budgetary approval to begin this journey? Because that first step is the most important one to start the process of adoption of this new technology. I'm wondering if you guys could respond to that, give guidance to the room, because when we all leave, we go back to our various places and we have this great idea, how to implement and begin that project, I think, is going to be a really critical step for people to be empowered with.
So we're in a pretty dynamic situation right now in terms of funding for research, if that's part of the question. Yeah. The federal picture is, a bit less certain. I'm not in the federal government anymore. I'll still be cautious about what I say, but so just the actual funding opportunities, that picture is potentially changing. Even if it weren't, though, I would say that the cycles of traditional healthcare research, when you think about the pace that Sarah mentioned and the early developments, if you sleep through it in the morning, you've missed it. So that's the timing is really critical. It's not just about the money. It's what are the expectations for it? How much time is available? How once the money is received to do this work, how much time is available? I mean, so it's time and money. So that's one thing. The other thing, to kind of maybe flip to the other side quickly, I think it's embedded in one of the things Sarah said about her phone, and I'll mention it in the analogy I said about, something that's a little more concrete, the windshield wiper, that I think I understand more about how it works, even if the switch is in the wrong direction. I didn't go to Honda or Volkswagen to buy a windshield motor. I don't even know what that actually looks like. I can imagine what it looks like. It's probably a box and it makes the thing go. I bought the whole car, and it happens to have a switch that turns the wiper on when I need it. So that's a system, right? I mean, from an engineering perspective. And, my expectation, even though I'm complaining about the fact that 2 different manufacturers have it backwards for this user, when I flip the switch, it works, right? And I don't really have to know how the full systems work. So with that kind of really kindergarten analogy on my behalf, I think AI companies that aren't also human factors savvy and aren't developing a product that is the full car with the switch and the lever to turn on, if they're just developing the windshield motor, they may be able to sell to another company for a full package and a system, but the people that are actually doing the buying in healthcare, they want a full system that works, and they want to know that their control of that motor is as seamless as possible. They have to think about it the least amount possible. So that sort of goes back to Ken's question, you know, what's going to drive it? I mean, I think in some cases, the people creating the products, they are the market for this information, and it will hopefully be represented in their product. I hope that makes sense.
Let me start by asking a question to you. Why is it that the most common way that doctors exchange medical information today is the fax machine, an 1834 invention, while ambient AI tools for EHR entry have been rapidly deployed and are growing quickly? And it comes down to the work that Clay Christensen did. You have to start with what's the problem the person thinks, not what's the problem we think. That's the problem with white papers. We could have all of us agreeing in this room that A, B, and C should happen, but unless whoever is going to fund it, getting back to the money, sees that as their problem, we're not going to succeed. So I think you have to start with what is their problem. And right now, I think the people who will have a problem, that's why I explained the different kinds of AI, generative AI, are the ones who are going to use derivatives. These are going to be companies that could never enter the generative AI world because it was just too expensive. It cost hundreds of billions of dollars, and they didn't have that kind of money. But particularly with the availability now of DeepSeek, and I don't say DeepSeek specifically, but it's a large language model that is open source. The barrier to entry has now dropped dramatically. And you're going to see not just 5 big companies whose names everyone knows, but dozens and dozens of smaller companies whose names no one knows. And when they go to create their products for exactly the reason that Jeff said, because when they go to implement them, they're not going to work. They're going to need help. And I think in the same way that the laboratories of academia have learned to work with drug development companies or with device companies, people are going to have to figure out how to work with those companies. And I think that that's where I'll say the big funding comes, particularly if the NIH has absolutely no money. By the way, there was a 10-day period last month when they funded 0 grants. Last year they funded 60,000 in a year. It's never happened. They've gone 10 days without funding a single grant. And the universities, particularly Stanford, that now has a hiring freeze and is cutting back in the laboratories, isn't going to be able to generate the funds. So I think private companies will have to do it, figuring out who they are, finding them, making it happen. I think leaders in this room are going to have to make those connections and provide the expertise to them that they know that they need, because when they go to sell their products, they're not doing well because the outcomes are not what they predicted and know they should be.
Thank you. My name's Seth Hardy from Penn State Health. Again, going back to sort of the business domain, when I think of organizations and hierarchy within them, you start with the culture, and then culture eats strategy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, so strategy's next. And then below that's ops, legal. We've heard a lot about culture from Dr. Parker and Dr. Brady. We've heard some about legal and ops from Dr. Pearl, but in that middle domain is strategy. And so my question to you is how is what we're here to talk about today going to create sustainable competitive advantage for our respective organizations?
I'm not sure that I could answer that in a way that would be, I know I can't answer it in a way that would be satisfactory, and I think it potentially goes back to what you said in your question as well. Because if you said make it their problem, I don't know who my stakeholders are, and they're different every single time. So if I'm trying to help facilitate implementation of some great new product, I got to get hospital leadership, legal, blah, blah, blah. Hospital execs have a completely different set of priorities than a frontline nurse who is or is not going to actually use that thing that exec leadership spent so much money on. In addition, there are, I think, really significant opportunities to think differently about how we might partner with companies, with venture capital and things like that. Simultaneously, we've got to think really hard about bias in this particular setting in ways that I think they have always been essential. We haven't always acknowledged them, but in ways that are even more essential because the bias will not be transparent. And so noticing that we are biasing something is quite difficult, and it's different. I worry really significantly about exclusively orienting ourselves toward solving every single problem and not leaving space for a bit of discovery also, because sometimes we really don't even understand what the problem is yet. And so I think there's opportunity to really pull both in. I think that managing the bridge between what is a priority for a patient, what is a priority for a caregiver, what is a priority for hospital executive leadership, what is a priority for an insurance agency, like all of those different stakeholders require not only a different language, but a different set of variables that are interesting to them. And how you navigate that in a way that is effective and doesn't take 17 years is really, really tricky and requires more than just a couple of really brilliant people throwing it together. It requires a lot of human capacity and a lot of ability to partner at multiple levels, which I think is quite difficult often. So in terms of a solution, I do. I don't know that there's a walk-awayable solution to this, but I do think that the conversation is absolutely critical, and the variety of folks that you have in the room is essential to moving that forward.
So when I teach at Stanford Business School, I teach strategy, so I love the question. And a major focus is that it's a combination of the strategic advantage that a particular company or particular organization has and the external environment in which it works. And what strategic thinking companies look for are opportunities to make the right thing happen that otherwise wouldn't happen unless they would take action at a particular time period. I disagree that capitation won't change. You're absolutely right. It's not going to change because we say that it should. But right now, Congress is contemplating eliminating what's called, the higher payments to hospitals for outpatient services, moving towards what's called site-neutral payments. And a major reason, and I'm going to guess that the Hershey Medical Center here does very, very well, is because it gets more money than the surrounding community might get when it does a mammogram or when it does a consultation. And when that disappears, right now the easiest way to it's a not-for-profit, I understand that, but to improve the bottom line is by being able to provide more services at a higher price. And when it can no longer have a higher price, it's going to have to look for other opportunities. Maybe that's the opportunity. I don't know what it's like in Hershey, Pennsylvania, recruiting nurses to come here to live and work, but most hospitals have had a nursing shortage, or certainly across the past few years. A generative AI tool used to be able to allow nurses to evaluate patients, be able to prevent, to be able to intervene sooner to avoid complications is a tremendous opportunity to make that shift. So it's the ability not to convince people that what we're saying is right, even though it is right. It's to convince them that the moment they're in at that particular time is the opportunity for someone. And maybe, hopefully it's Hershey. It's a perfect organization to do it, founded by the right reasons for $1 to create the campus, that now is the time for us to be able to do a capitated approach. Now is the time for us to be able to sell to the businesses that work around us, and I'm sure are struggling, particularly if tariffs come into place, that now is the time to make a move that we could not do for a long time. And finding that strategic moment, I think, is just as crucial to strategy as the competitive advantage itself might be. 90% of companies that have great products fail. They don't fail because the product's not good enough. They fail because the inability to get someone to decide that they want to pay for that is what occurs, and it's because they haven't figured out how to find the right opportunity to tell them about it and convince them to allow you to give the chance to do it. Consulting companies have a great ability to do this. We in academia tend to think that great ideas and great products are enough on its own. Strategy says that they're not.
I wanted to just follow up on that question, on Josh and Seth's question. In the future, I want you to speculate. Who do you think the customer is going to be for AI? We talked about in the current model, where it's volume is driving the incentives. I'm the customer as the radiologist. You're trying to make me more efficient. I get more people through an ineffective process. We talked about the challenges of getting a shift in the financial models for healthcare in general, which move at a glacial pace. In the future, do you see the customer being a direct-to-consumer, direct-to-patient model where I'm going to get my diabetes managed by Apple or Google or Amazon? Or are they going to fragment the current healthcare system and say, I have AI implemented solutions that manage your chronic diseases, and I'm going to sell you this entire platform to manage your system because you can't get the financial models correct?
In terms of the financial model, there's two parts to it. There's the large language models. They're free right now. You want a little bit better performing one, you have to pay a little bit to purchase it, but they're inexpensive. I don't think that's going to be a challenge getting people to use it. The data says the numbers are increasing. Every time I come to a conference, it's becoming hard for me. It used to be hard for me to find anyone who had used a large language model. Now it's hard for me to find someone who hasn't. I'd ask you to stand up, but you might be a little embarrassed. So I'll assume that after today, everyone will have used it. No, it's becoming very, very common. You know, the question before about medical students, I can't find a medical student who's not using it all the time. Asking about what questions will I get asked on various examinations. Can you take all the information on a particular topic and help me learn it better for my upcoming exam? You go down the list of ways in which that's being used. I think the real question is going to be around these, I'll say, disease-focused tools. And the real question is going to come, how expensive are they? I mean, right now you have companies that are buying products that involve diabetes management. They do a good job. It's just that the cost of the product is as much as the dollar is saved. Generative AI will change that model. So how do we move from that small number of people to a larger number of people? I think communities, particularly socioeconomic challenged areas, are going to have community centers where people are going to come to use those particular types of tools. They're the ones who are going to be purchasing it. But I think the big driver of it is going to come out of the purchasers who at some particular point say, we can't keep having healthcare rise 7.6%, which is, by the way, what it went up last year, when the GDP is rising at 2.5% to 3% maybe. And it's going to be that, again, that economics that drive that. And once that process starts happening, then the pieces are going to align around it. So I think the way we think about radiology products is going to be very different than we think of generative AI. In radiology products, it's going to be purchased by the radiology group of the hospital, who's going to see as a way to see more things, and doctors who think it should reduce their burnout are now going to be taking care of 120 images a day rather than 40 or 60 that they probably should be. But the generative AI tools, that's why, as they say, patient and doctor, and it's going to be driven by the fact that it can save lives for patients and it can save dollars for the health system and reduce burnout for clinicians.
Hello, my name is Shadi Hijawi. I'm an internist, hospitalist, and clinical informatician at Penn State Health. So thank you so much for this great gathering for the organizers, and welcome to Hershey. So my question is probably more of like generic question in the way that I practice. So I practice applied clinical informatics. So basically we deal with all different things that come from EMR or other technology tools that people complain about or have issues or problems with. And we're being tasked to solve those. And every time we meet about this, especially when we get questions from our buddies from quality and patient safety, is that we have to think about the problem that has, when we deal with it, it has three pillars. One is technology, part of it, that's why they come to us, but also it's process and people. And that's why it's a great discussion here talking about human factors. So while trying to do these things, everyone thinks that technology is always the solution that has the magical touch. And that's just so unfortunate and so untrue, because also we're limited to what the technology is offering us. And it's really great that, with generative AI and AI is presenting more opportunities. But everyone is always thinking, especially in the EMR, everyone really loves this, the pop-up alerts or the clinical decision support. And we know how these are being really not as much efficient and changing behavior, because what we're trying to do is basically changing behavior using these tools. So the other part of it is working on the process. Yes, we try to streamline process. But when it comes to the major factor, in my opinion, and many others will agree, is changing behavior of people. So that's the most important pillar, and that's what we always struggle with, the change management and how we could be able to change behavior with the muscle memory, and that's again where the human-computer interaction is a very essential thing that you have to be aware of, as you guys discussed. So my question is, maybe generic, maybe it's the whole topic why we're meeting for these couple of days, is how do you think generative AI, with all the great things that brought forward, and AI in general, it's going to bridge this gap of trying to change human behavior, of trying to make it really, you have this, is it just by having a generative AI, is that as optimistic as it's going to make the change, or there is more things to how to achieve that?
Yeah, thank you for that thoughtful question. There's a lot in there. So I'll maybe try to connect this a bit to Dr. Mosier's question before too about who is the customer for AI. Probably the common link across the presentations that we had is we're really talking about systems of care. That's what we're trying to establish. That's what people are going to buy. Maybe not in all cases. There might be sort of episodic, very narrow focused, care delivery episodes that people purchase. But in general, what people want and need is a working system of care delivery, right? And so when we think in that way, it doesn't diminish the individual components of the system, but it definitely reorients the priority, if you will. It's not on making AI work. It's AI making the system work better. And it's not just AI, it's all the points that you said. It's the human factor. So one of the reasons I think this conference is so important. And so, if we think about systems of care, and that's what people are going to be needing and wanting and purchasing, and if we think about the ideal situation, also connect to Dr. Graber's point about training, the training that people need, like yourself and others who are working in those systems, leaders, and making decisions, they need to have a certain level of awareness of other parts of the system, maybe not expertise. You're aware of culture and personnel. Your expertise is health information technology. You know your component of the system and how it connects up with others, and you know enough about the others. And so the mindset when an organization comes to the table with those perspectives, with their specific expertise, but also with full awareness of the other components of the system, and the recognition to speak up and say, this appears to be a health information technology problem to others who are looking, because that's how it's manifested, but it's actually a personnel problem or a culture problem or whatever it happens to be. That is really, in my opinion, going to be the tipping point, when it's not about the individual components of the system. Because what that does is that frees us to say, is there a real opportunity for AI to solve this problem, or not? And if people are more neutral on that kind of a question, when AI really is the answer, it's going to flourish. And when it's not going to flourish. And that's the same for every other component of the system. So when we have that kind of fundamental systems view with clear objectives to what we want the system to produce, quality, 6 domains of quality, that's what we want out of healthcare. no matter how you get there, technology, AI, simple approach, telemedicine, in person, all of those things are important, but they are not central. The project is not how to make telehealth better or how to make AI better. It's how all the tools that we have at our disposal can help the system work better. I know that sounds simple, but that to me is the real question.
I think the key word is leadership. It's going to happen because leaders are able to effectively explain to people what's happening to get them to recognize the value and be able to take action around it. And we could spend a couple of days, weeks, or months learning leadership. But I want to use EHR as an example of a completely failed implementation effort. I don't know any clinician to this day who still likes it. They tolerate it. They like the information. Why did it fail? In the book ChatGPT MD, I say that any technology that either takes more time or generates less income will never be adopted in medicine. The EHR took more time, and it was designed to increase income, but it turned out to actually fail to accomplish that. Telemedicine has only worked when the government has been willing to pay through Medicare to accomplish it. So I think the mindset you have to ask is, how are you going to convince, as a leader, others to come along and make it happen? What are you going to have to do with the nurses to give them the experience that if they can segment their patients and figure out who needs the most care, who needs the least care, they can actually provide better care? They actually can save lives by intervening before problems get worse. That's the type of approach that needs to happen, and it doesn't happen by emails, it doesn't happen by white documents, it doesn't happen by anything except the leader getting in there and spending the time necessary to get them to accomplish it. But the good news is that once you get it to happen a certain number of times, the research says that it then becomes spreading more rapidly. And it's why today what I tell people at just about every conference that I speak is that if you are a clinician, start taking some of the patients you see, put data into a generative AI tool today. When you have time, one or two patients a day, make sure it's anonymized so there's no HIPAA violations or anything else sitting in place, and see the answers that it gets. It takes about 10 hours to get good at using the tool. You've got to ask question after question after question. And start telling patients to put information in. Don't say, I have. Say, a 45-year-old man has a particular problem. So to protect yourself relative to privacy. And start seeing what would happen if you put that information in place before you came to the doctor's office. What would happen if you put it in at 11 o'clock at night when your kid had 103 fever and you didn't know whether to go to the ER or not? And that you couldn't tell whether the child might have meningitis or simply had cold or whatever else was going on. And how would it tell you to look to see whether the child is listless in bed or riding their bicycle around the floor? How would you know the likely signs in which you should call 911? Because you can't tell that on Google, and you can't tell that by calling your doctor's office. They also go to the ER. That's probably the last place you want to be, except for an occasional patient, when you always want to go there. And figuring out how to do that. I think the more people use the tools and try the tools, the more they're going to start to embrace the tools. And once they start embracing the tools, everything that we want to accomplish will be easier, because now they'll be open to changing their practices, to changing their mindset, to changing the culture, and the culture will evolve on its own around that.
This has been such a great conversation. We have gone a bit over time. We're about to have our break, but we have one last question.
Thanks. I'm asking this question as someone who is coming in probably as different than all the rest of you. I'm actually a human factors practitioner. I've been supporting the DoD and intelligence community for the last 15 years. There's a lot in common with what we do for the government and what y'all are trying to do here for medical. I'm actually, so by day I do that work, by night I'm a PhD student looking specifically to move into this, and that's why I'm here. But following in the tradition of human factors, following in the tradition of human factors, I'm going to be the designated wet blanket. And one thing that we are seeing, that I see and that we're seeing, is that this is going to be AI medical adoption is seated within the context of socio-technical systems within socio-technical systems. And so I'm so glad to see that we're taking that ecological view. But if anybody here has seen Pentagon Wars and anyone here has seen Jurassic Park, you kind of know where I'm going with this. How do we address the ability to do what we can do while also mitigating realistically the natural indication to pass the buck forever, and to not have the policies in place and not to have the regulatory bodies in place? Because that's what we're seeing, is we're seeing that with AI at the state level, there is this hesitation to put in any regulation at the state level because California is worried that if they regulate business, that those businesses will go to Texas, and there's a lot going on at the higher levels that are impacting the lower levels, that are impacting our ability to do research, to study the right things, to implement these things safely, for people to trust them. And so what's being done to consider this massive ecology and to make sure that we have that in place? Sorry.
Not enough.
I'll start by saying, so pretty direct statement. I think not only regulation, but regulation as a representation of awareness of risks, and with benefits, but risks, is one way to think about that is it's not a matter of whether we're going to discover that or not. It's when we're going to discover it and what it's going to take to discover it. It will happen. It's just, there is a reality that exists, and humans are humans, and technology is technology, and we've even though this technology is new and there will be variations of it, history's shown us what's going to happen. So it's not a matter of if, but when. As somebody in the field, my hope is that, not to be too crude about it, but the body count will be lower than it might otherwise be before action happens, right? And, any risks for harm. So that's not if, but when. And then when it happens, my hope is that, let's just take regulation, that regulation is also considerate of the same exact principles we're talking about here. And regulation is right-sized and appropriate. It considers a systems view. It doesn't overreact. And it sort of, and so that's the ideal. Now, whether we can get on that path and stay on that path, it depends on a lot of different factors. How are our societies able to just manage this, and politics, et cetera. But I am hopeful. I think we have examples to look at, and we have an opportunity to right-size regulation. The other thing that's a good balancer for regulation, by the way, I spent 5 years at the Food and Drug Administration before I was at AHRQ in the Office of Vaccines. So analyzing risk and benefit and interpreting that in novel products. It was when a lot of the newer mRNA vaccines were coming out, et cetera. So regulation works best when it works close enough, not too closely, but closely with the industry that's being regulated. And furthermore, that the industry and the regulators recognize that proper, appropriately dosed regulation will actually increase the value of what's being regulated. So right now, for example, I think a lot of people are sitting on the sidelines waiting for AI to prove itself. They're concerned about some of the same things you're concerned about, risks, et cetera. Liability concerns in healthcare are very real. There aren't wide margins to sort of think about and play with. So all of that caution is manifesting already for different ways. Regulation, ironically, can actually help support the industry by efficiently, on behalf of society, ensuring that it's safe and actually helping the products move through development and into kind of a productive marketplace more quickly. That's just the basics of regulation. So that's my hope for the future. We'll see what happens, but I think that's a potential path forward.
The data says the transformational change doesn't happen until 30% of people are involved. There's thousands of examples of that happening every place. That's going to require that everyone in this room talk to 10 people next week and talk to 100 people over the next year and be able to get to have them talk to 10 people and 100 people. That is how the transformation occurs. Once the 30% number gets passed, what you see is a rapid expansion going forward. And to that end, I would invite any of you who are interested, let me know what's working. I want to hear from you. Where are the successes occurring so I can help to promote it? My website's robertpearlmd.com, and just let me know what's happening. I'll do my part if everyone in this room goes along and does theirs. Thank you so much.
It's a deal.
Can I just pull it back? So you gotta have the data too. So to your previous question about informatics, one of the things that occurs to me is there's been tons of great data done, great research done in other industries. I'm thinking specifically about transportation. So for example, there's been lots of studies done utilizing naturalistic driving data. So you gather data while people are just doing their thing, driving their car. The cars are outfitted with tons and tons of sensors, but we're gathering data as you are doing your normal day to day. That then not just results in buckets of data understanding how fast tires start to degrade, or how where your blinker thing should be and how much pressure it takes and what should the car sound like. It also tells you about the moments prior to a deviation. It tells you about what patterns are occurring in the car when you start to nod off. And to me, that kind of data is actually where, gathering that kind of data is actually where I think AI could be tremendously valuable, is AI monitoring context and helping to understand that, and helping to understand many deviations in context to then allow us to maybe nudge or then engage in a different way to say, hey, not all deviations are equivalent. I understand that. Some are extremely valuable, some are necessary. But identifying when is it a necessary thing and when is it not. I don't know if you guys remember this, but there was a time where there was some sort of safety feature in a car. I saw a commercial for it, that when you started to nod off, it would sense somehow that your head was nodding like that. It went away like so fast, right? Because it was too sensitive because people move their heads a lot. And what replaced it was the lane deviation. And that is where I think understanding the context helps you answer more than one question. Lane deviation is dangerous. It doesn't matter what the genesis is. It's dangerous when not done in a, So to me, I think that in thinking about, you got to have the baseline data to start to be able to have these very convincing conversations, to start to be able to talk to your Congress people and to your leadership, et cetera.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the panel, thank all the questioners. This has been such a great discussion. It was hard to interrupt, so we got a little behind schedule. So here's the plan. We're going to be very flexible. We're going to pivot. We're going to still have our 15-minute break. There's a wonderful snack and drinks out there for you guys. We're going to shorten the meet and greet for the small groups. So after you get your snack and meet people and have a little break and stretch your legs, and it's been a very long session, find your way to your small group room. We're going to make sure that you know how to get there and recognize a few faces that are in the small group with you, and then we'll break for lunch, and that's how we'll get back on schedule. Thanks very much.